Peace,
Blog
everyone.
Talk Radio.
Peace, everyone. This is Baba Kilindi of the Entheogenic Explorer program. I want to welcome everyone out to this evening's show. We're going to have a great show this evening. We're going to be talking about the Black Panther, and of course, since it's coming up here in the 16th, we want to get in a little information to bring everybody up to speed before we go see the program. And I'm gonna bring my guest host Robb Hinson in. Let's see if we can get him in here. Robb, are you there?
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good.
Okay, good.
Can you hear me good? There's a little buzz.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I hear you pretty good there, Tony. Yeah.
You can hear pretty good. Good. Well, our guest host is here. We don't do a lot of startup playing music and things like that because we have a limited amount of time, and we want to use all the time for the information. So, Robb's here. We're ready to get started. As I said before, we're going to be talking about the Black Panther. Marvel superheroes, how it connects to the rest of the Marvel cinematic universe. We're going to be talking about the realness of the Black Panther, dealing with the Black Panther Society, also some of the Nazi super soldier programs that led us into a lot of the things that we're doing and dealing with now as far as strength, superhuman strength, genetics, DNA, all the things that you all are interested in. Okay, I don't know what that was, but is that a phone in the background ringing?
Yeah, Tony, hang on, I'm handling it.
Okay.
Good. I just have to turn that phone off.
Yeah, we're going to get right into it. So my guest today is Robb Hinson. We met many years ago at a martial arts camp, and we've been great friends ever since because he's such a wealth of knowledge and information dealing with these subjects that is phenomenal. And this won't be the last show that he comes in on, and we'd like everybody to sit back, hold on to your seats because we're getting ready to get in. Robb, just give a little background on your comic book expertise, and how you got started with comic books and things there in the great city of Philadelphia.
I'd like to say hi to everybody, and I'd like to thank Kilindi for bringing me in on the show. As you said, our relationship goes back quite a way. As far as my background with it is concerned, I really started off in the 1960s just as a comic book fan, mainly of Marvel comics. I kind of read everything. I read the National Periodicals or DC Comics, which is owned by Warner Brothers. I read lots of other. They had a lot of other comic books out in the 60s, which is known in the comic book realm as the Silver Age of comics. So if you look at the comic books that started from the 1930s through the 40s that were really popular during World War II, that's known as the Golden Age of comics, which kind of started with Superman when they published the first Superman story in Action Comics. I think it was around 1938 or 39 and so forth. And then after that, Marvel Comics followed up with, at that time, Marvel Comics wasn't called Marvel, it was called Timely Comics. So that's when all the Marvel Golden Age characters, which the Human Torch, Captain America being one of them, was also part of the modern Marvel universe and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but he really started back in the 1930s. And then you also had the Submariner, which they have not yet made a movie about, but they're talking about making one. So basically, those were the big three back then. And then flashing forward after the war was over, superheroes kind of went into limbo because they kind of stopped publishing them for a while, and the comic books steered in the direction of horror comics. And then somewhere around the 1960s, they started doing superheroes again, and Marvel Comics jumped in with what we call the modern age of comic books, where they started publishing superheroes, starting with the Fantastic Four. So I kind of jumped in right around that time. I had two influences that got me involved in it. One influence, strangely enough, was my mother had a hairdresser that she would go to about once every 2 weeks or so. I can't remember exactly how. It might have been more often than that. And I happened to go there one time to kind of, escort my mother home after she was getting out of the hairdresser. And I noticed that in the waiting room of the hairdresser salon, where people would wait for, the people that were getting their hair done. Because, women getting their hair done is a ritual. And the way I perceived it back then, that it took hours. So if you're waiting, for your mom to get done, you're sitting there. And this woman had a magazine rack where she had all these magazines to give you some reading material while you're sitting and waiting. And underneath the magazine rack, there was a chest with nothing but comic books in it. And I mean, every type of comic book that was out at that time. And you could just sit there and read them for free. She had tons of them in there. I don't know why she had these comics in there. I never talked to her about it. I don't know why they were in a hair salon, but they were there. And when I found out about that, I was such a big fan of comics by that time, because I had started reading comics with the first issue of the Fantastic Four that my mom brought home from the newsstand, because she saw there was a monster on the cover of it coming through the pavement. That's the cover of the first Fantastic Four issue. And she brought it home to encourage me to read. And she knew that I liked monsters, because I kind of got into monsters and all that type of stuff from, we had an old black and white television, and they had a rerun of King Kong. And the first time I saw King Kong on television, it blew my mind. And I really got interested in monsters and science fiction and all that stuff. So I would go to the library and read books on mythology, because, they had all these monsters in mythology. And my mother saw it was encouraging me to read, so she basically wanted me to be as literate as possible, did everything she could to encourage it, and she brought this comic book home, and that's how I got involved in comic books. And it was a Marvel comic book that got me involved. So that's really what got me reading them. So, and then I started to go to the hair salon and read all this woman's comic books, so I didn't have to buy them, and then that got me even more into it. So we're talking early to mid-'60s, and then through the mid to late 60s, I was a big fan of comic books all through that time. When I graduated from high school and I was going to college, I took a writing course. And I wrote an article, like a mock-up article, for the semester. It was like one of the projects for the semester was to write a magazine article. And I did it, and the professor of the class told me that the article was professional level, and that he told me, you got a talent for this, you should actually do this at some point in your life. I mean, I wasn't really planning on doing that. I was planning on taking up a career in physical education and exercise. Physiology is what I was interested in. So the writing was a sideline. It just so happens that years later, when I moved to New York City with my girlfriend, I wound up getting an offer to write for a magazine company through a friend of mine who talked to one of the editors and told him about me. And I wound up becoming a freelance writer for a while in New York City. And when I left New York City to come back to Philadelphia, I ran into a bunch of comic book artists who had a Philadelphia-based comic graphic arts company called Maximum Overtime. And originally, I hooked up with these guys just on a social level. I wasn't trying to get into writing comic books on any level. I was just a big fan of it. And some of these guys were professional comic book artists, but they needed a writer. They wanted to start their own little independent comic book company. And they had already been working for Marvel and DC and doing a lot of professional work for them. And some of this work is publicly known. One of the artists was one of the top artists of the 80s and 90s. And he worked for Marvel and DC. You know, his name is Mr. Paris Cohen. And he was one of the guys that was in this group. In fact, he was kind of the head of the group, more or less. And there was another guy named Martin King. There was a bunch of guys. And they kind of talked me into writing some comic book scripts or stories that they would then do the artwork for in an attempt to maybe get some independent stuff done. And I wound up getting into comic books as a writer kind of sideways through that. And I didn't do, you know, a lot of big stuff, but I did some stuff for some independent companies, and we did actually do one comic book that was supposed to be picked up by an independent comic company called Axis Comics. This was still in the 90s. And it would have probably have been, had it succeeded, it would have probably been on the same line as Milestone Comics, which was the first major black independent comic book label. But it was, well, it wasn't really independent because it was under DC Comics. They did the distribution for it. And these guys had all worked for DC Comics before they got this Milestone started. So Milestone is known as being like the first black comic book company. Well, there were a number of other independent black comic book groups / companies floating around, but none of them kind of went anywhere. And the one we were going to work for was called Axis Comics. Paris and I created a character called Marcus Arena, which was kind of a space sci-fi gladiator epic. And it got a lot of rave reviews. They mentioned it in one of the trade comic book magazines, Hero magazines. They did an article, and they talked to Paris about it. He mentioned me as the writer and whatnot, and there was some artwork from it. And so it started a little bit of a buzz. And for some reason or other, the two guys that owned the company, a guy named Todd Johnson and another guy named Larry Stroman, they had some kind of falling out or something happened that I'm not very clear on. And even though the books were heavily advertised, the company folded before they could come out, although we did get paid for doing the first issue. So the first issue did get completed. We still pretty much own the rights to it because we co-created it. And it's kind of in limbo right now. But so, you know, that was one of my experiences with comic books. I wound up doing some stuff with another artist, a guy named Sky Owens. And he did more of the independent, underground type comics. And I did some stuff with him. But in my experiences doing the convention circuit and going down to DC and going down to Marvel Comics on some projects or proposals of things they wanted done at the time, I got familiar with the comic book world in terms of how it works on the inside. And I got to talk to and meet a lot of the artists and some of the writers and some of the editors. And you kind of get this feel for the history, the inside history of it. You know, so that was kind of my experience with the whole comic book thing. And that's kind of how I got involved in it. So I started off as a fan. I read all the original stuff in the Silver Age. I even read the retro stuff from the Golden Age because I got so involved in it and so interested in it. So that would be my, experiencing it. Hello? I don't know if he got me. Hello? Okay, I'm on it.
Yes, hope we're back. Waiting for. Are we back on the air? Are we back on the air?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? I can't hear it. I can't hear. I can't hear nothing. I can't hear anything. Okay. Hello?
Are we back on here? I don't know what the AI is raising raising its head. What I'm going to have to do is, folks, probably try to close this down and reopen all the way from the beginning. So please work with me and call back in. But we're going to shut all this down and come back in 3 minutes. Thank you. Yes.
Hey, Kilindi, yeah, I could hear you, but I don't think you can hear me. I heard you just say, because you just said we're going to shut it down and start it back over again from the top. I was born here, and I was hearing you. And I pushed the 1, and it said you are now in the host queue. And I was trying to get you, but apparently you couldn't hear me.
Okay.
So I don't know what's going on with that.
I don't either.
I don't know how much. I don't know how much of that introduction they got.
They got the introduction. When I spoke, then it became difficult. Okay, let me try this. We're gonna try it again.
Yeah. Are you actually in the studio? Or
yes, I'm in the computer studio. Yes. Okay, let me try this. Let me try this.